Did you just happen to pick up Space Marine 2 over the Christmas holiday? Or maybe you're someone who has very limited time and you're intimidated by the massive grind that could be Space Marine 2. Well, this video is going to be for you. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to run through each class, talk about what weapons really beginners should be focusing on. Every weapon in this game, it is viable, but there are going to be some that are going to be more useful than others. And if you're just starting out, or again, maybe you only have limited time, it can be quite intimidating to go through and grind everything. So we're just going to focus on the weapons that I would recommend for newer or time-limited players and walk you through my reasons as to why. So we're going to run through all 6 of the classes. Now, real quick, I do want to throw out, sometimes there are going to be weapons that overlap with each class. That's completely fine. Sometimes you might finish up a weapon that I'll say is worth using already on a previous class. If so, we'll take a look at what are going to be some good secondary options to focus on. But we're going to start off with the tactical because this is the class that to me is the jack of all trades. I think it's the easiest one for newer players to get into, and it also has probably the most options within the game, specifically looking at the primary weapons. So let's get right into it here. Now, really for me in the tactical, there's going to be 4 weapons that you're going to want to focus on pretty immediately. The first one is going to be the standard bolt rifle. Now, the reason I really like the standard bolt rifle is a couple reasons. For starters, as you can see looking at the stat lines, as you go from each ranking or tier, the damage does increase and you get a nice buff to a lot of the stats. Now, the thing though, for me personally, that I really love about the bolt rifle is in its standard configuration, it's already extremely nice. You have a fair bit of damage. You also have an option that's going to increase your overall mag size capabilities. However, there is also a secondary option that you get that's going to come with the grenade launcher. Now, one of the nice things about this is if you find yourself struggling with a lot of the horde style enemies, maybe you're not at the point where you're able to do melee combat the best yet, the grenade launcher is going to be a fantastic option for helping to clear out hordes and also getting a lot of damage on the Majoris and higher enemies. Now, one thing I do want to throw out, originally when the grenade launcher first came out in the game, it was rather, I don't want to say overpowered, but it was a very powerful option within the game, and they have since gone back and nerfed it, so it's not as good as it once was, but it's as good once as it ever was. RIP Toby Keith, the OG. But the grenade launcher, very viable option, and the bolt rifle itself is very good. It is automatic. I recommend kind of using a tap fire for it, unless you are using a variant that has an accuracy buff, just because even though the bloom on it is very slow and it is quite controllable, sometimes the more prolonged fire that you have, you are going to notice it's going to be easier for shots to go wide. Personally, I love using the bolt rifle on Majoris and higher, and then using the grenade launcher to help kind of clear out horde enemies. Now, one of the other nice things specifically looking at the bolt rifle is, for some of you newer players, if you do decide to go into the stratagems and you're earning the accolade points, which are going to be this blue currency up here, you are going to have the option at 300 points to purchase a heroic weapon. The bolt rifle does have a heroic variant, and should you unlock it, you'll be able to play with the heroic version without having completed all the prior options beforehand. Now, each weapon has its own perk tree. One thing I'm going to throw out is a lot of these perks. Honestly, I would experiment around with them, see what you like yourself. For me personally, when it comes to weapon perks, I'm looking at a lot of stuff that's just going to be able to increase my damage, whether that's through headshots or just a base damage upgrade overall. But the nice thing is it is completely free to reset your weapon perk. So if you find that a specific perk you don't like, you find something better, you can go back and reset them completely for free and rearrange your tree. But this is the tree that I use. So overall, bolt rifle, very simple weapon to pick up and use. Plus, you do have some different variants of it, specifically having a grenade launcher attachment, which is going to be really nice, especially if you're just starting out and trying to learn a lot of the basic mechanics of the game. Now, the next option for the tactical, and probably my personal favorite weapon on tactical, is going to be the heavy bolt rifle. So, as the heavy bolt rifle starts off, it's going to feel a little similar to the standard bolt rifle. However, the buff that you have is going to be that you're going to have a bigger magazine size and ammo reserve, and there's going to be multiple variants that are going to assist with that. Now, one of the reasons why I really love the bolt rifle is because, while granted, there are some that, as you can see, have better accuracy multipliers than others. Once you get up to the relic tier, that accuracy is really going to shoot through the roof. It also has a very kind of slow rate of fire, and the bloom magnification that you get, sometimes it takes a little bit for that to fully kick in. So again, if you're using controlled burst with it, however, you're going to have a little bit more freedom with how long those bursts are going to be. You're going to be able to keep this on target and drill headshots like it's nothing. Now, with the heavy bolt rifle, real quick, there's the perk tree that I use. Again, just focusing a lot on dealing out additional headshot damage when I'm able to. Now, once you get up to the higher tier, you're going to have 4 different versions of it. This one does not have specifically a heroic tier 1, and I'm sorry, it's actually going to be the artificier. So you'll have 3 or 4 different variants here. However, there's going to be one that's going to include a scope. So just like the bolt rifle, you do have a variant that's really going to stick out. Now, using the option with the scope, and again, it is going to be available at artificier and relic tier, you are going to get a little bit of a headshot bonus. It could be something that's worthwhile using, especially if you don't feel that you're getting as accurate shots with the standard zoom mechanic that's available for pretty much every weapon in the game. You are going to have a way to reach out to a little bit of a further distance, plus you'll still get those, or that additional headshot modifier, and you have the benefits of a higher base magazine capacity as long as an ammo reserve. One of the other reasons that I really love the heavy bolt rifle is it's going to stack really well should you decide to prestige with one of the first prestige perks that you can get, Acuity, which is going to give you a headshot damage buff from 3 to 5% as long as you're hitting consecutive headshots. With the heavy bolt rifle, this is going to be something that's easy to keep on target, so you're going to be able to take advantage of the buff that perk brings. And truthfully, you can dish out some really heavy damage with this weapon very fast, and with that magazine size, you don't have to worry about that perk resetting nearly as often as what you would with the standard bolt rifle. Now, the final 2 weapons that I'm going to recommend, because they're going to be extremely easy to use. First, we're going to take a look at the Melta rifle here. So the Melta rifle is essentially, think of it as like the shotgun for Space Marine 2. Instead of using like buckshot that you see in a lot of other shotguns in other video games, you're essentially going to shoot out a very superheated like field of energy that will just shred targets in front of you. The Melta rifle, it's going to be extremely easy to use, even starting off at your base version. You can see the firepower is going to be extremely high. And as you go through, most different variants are either going to focus on magazine capacity and ammo reserve, or the range. And that's going to be true up until the point where you hit the relic tier. Here you're going to have a little bit more flexibility where you can go for range, or you can go for fire rate, and finally ammo and magazine capacity. For me personally, all the variants that tend to buff your mag capacity and ammo reserve are the better options to take. This weapon already thrives up close and personal. I found that yes, sometimes the additional range can really help out, but a lot of times you're going to be very up close and personal. Anyways, I just like having the additional mag and ammo capacity, especially because as you start playing on some of the higher difficulties, you're not always going to be able to find as much ammo. So having more in the mag, plus it does have a little bit of a longer reload speed, that's going to keep the gun up, you're going to keep the melta rifle fed, and you're just going to be shredding through enemies. Now, something else to throw out as you do get to some of the higher difficulties, I'm really looking or talking about lethal and absolute in specific. There was a weapon nerf that was added to the melta rifle just because of how powerful it is. That being said, it is still extremely viable even on those difficulties. However, you're just going to want to focus on having a really solid secondary and melee weapon should you run into terminus enemies, because really that's what the nerf is affecting. Now, in a similar vein to the melta rifle, we have the pyroblaster. This is a newer weapon that was added in a very recent update, and this has quickly become one of my favorite weapons in the game. It's fantastic. Now, for me personally, what the pyroblaster does really well is it clears out hordes like they're not even there. So a lot of your Minoris enemies just kind of point in a direction, move the crosshairs on your screen from the left and right, and you will just watch everything in front of you disappear. Now, as we go through, or as you start ranking up, you're going to unlock some different variants to it. Mostly, they're going to switch back and forth, as you can see, between magazine capacity and venting speed. Personally, for me, I chose to go with the venting speed, just that way I can continue to get back into the fight with this weapon, because its venting speed can feel a little slow, especially with the amount of use that you're going to get out of it whenever it comes to Majoris and above. Minoris, this thing instantly melts. However, once you get to Majoris, just something to throw out, and higher for those types of enemies, something that I notice a lot of players, and even myself to a certain extent, it's very easy to get tunnel vision where you know that, hey, I've been burning this target for a little bit, it should be going down into executable range. Sometimes you're not as close as what you think, and you'll start tanking hits expecting that enemy to go down. Just be aware of that. Don't be afraid to engage in melee combat. The nice thing about the pyroblaster as well is you do have a damage over time that occurs. So of course, if you're lighting something on fire, it's on fire. That's going to continue to hurt it. So sometimes if you know you're really close and you see an enemy going in for maybe a melee attack that's blockable or dodgeable, it's okay to switch over to a melee roll. Who knows, it might not even finish its combo and just go into executable range because of the amount of burn damage that it's taking. So again, this is a very good weapon. Another thing I want to throw out is, especially on some of the higher difficulties where the melta rifle is going to struggle a little bit with terminus enemies, the pyroblaster I feel actually does a lot better than the melta rifle, because when you are lighting something on fire, not only are you getting that damage over time, but you're almost going to provide like an armor nerf essentially for that target. So if you have something, it's been lit on fire and it's actually taking burn damage, the rest of your teammates are going to get essentially a damage boost whenever they are hitting that target. It's only going to be very slight, however it does add up rather quick. So not only is this good for clearing out hordes of enemies, but it's also really good as a team weapon, helping your team get a lot of damage on some of the higher difficulty enemies rather quickly. So in terms of primary weapons, those are the four that I would focus on, because I think you're going to get the most use out of them, specifically with the tactical class. Of course, there are going to be some other ones that we might talk about later for other classes, but those are the four I would focus on. Now, coming in to the sidearms, really, at this point, there's two that I would recommend starting off with. Now, pretty much every class in the game is going to have access to the bolt pistol and the heavy bolt pistol. For me personally, I recommend starting off with the heavy bolt pistol. The main reason being is, for starters, now it's available on every class, which wasn't true at one point. But as you can see, you have a much higher starting base damage than what you do with the regular bolt pistol. Plus, you do get a lot of nice buffs to the weapon, whether that be to your magazine capacity, accuracy, and yeah, I think that's really it. Yeah, magazine capacity plus damage as well. And it's super nice for taking out smaller targets. If you're popping headshots, a lot of times they're going to be instantly going down, even on some of the higher levels. Of course, assuming you have an appropriately leveled heavy bolt pistol. But also, it's nice for a lot of the melee focus classes. And looking at the tactical, if you are running something like the Pyroblaster or the Melta Rifle, and you want to still be able to reach out and touch enemies like Norithropes that might not always be at ground level or close enough for you to hit with melee weapons, the heavy bolt pistol is going to allow you to get a fair bit of damage on them rather quickly. And again, this is going to be available on every class, so if you do decide to finish it early, hey, you can just bounce back to the bolt pistol at any time. The bolt pistol itself, again, it's still viable. However, with the heavy bolt pistol being on every class, at this point, I just kind of feel like it's painfully mid is the best way that I can describe it. It does everything that you would want your secondary to do, but every other secondary in the game is going to do the same thing, but just better. They might have some trade-offs here and there, but ultimately, again, if you're time limited or you're a newer player, definitely focus on the heavy bolt pistol because you're going to get more out of it. Coming in second place, though, is going to be the plasma pistol, and again, this is going to be available on a lot of the classes right from the beginning. If you find that you don't like the heavy bolt pistol or you just want to use something different, the plasma pistol is a very good option. So one of the nice things about it is you don't have to worry about manual reloads. However, you will have to worry about it overheating. However, there are plenty of perks that can help with that. And one of the nice things as well is the plasma pistol has two different damage variations, or rather modes of fire. So you have your base version, or you have your base mode of fire, which is just going to be the standard little blue balls. However, if you do decide to charge them up, you'll have a much bigger blue ball that's going to go flying at the enemies and will also deal some AoE damage as well. So if you have like a small group of Minoris enemies, you're going to be able to just take a single charge shot, pop that in their direction, and as long as it hits somewhere, you should be able to take them all out, or at least deal enough damage where just a few shots from the plasma pistol itself will mop them up. Now, looking at most plasma pistol options here, before you hit Relic, you're really going to see either higher venting speeds or magazine capacities. Once you hit Relic, however, you will be able to see one that has an additional rate of fire. Again, all three of these are very viable options. For me personally, I do gravitate more towards the heavy bolt pistol, especially on the tactical. The main reason being, again, this is one that has a heroic variant that, let's actually show the perk so we can talk about it, will allow you to take out any enemy that's doing an elite scream status, which is essentially calling for reinforcements. And as long as you hit them in the headshot while they're screaming out, you're going to instantly kill them. For me, that's a nice buff, just because a lot of the primary weapons that I'm using are already going to be very effective. I just like the idea that if something's trying to call reinforcements, I can just immediately switch over to my bolt pistol, one shot, headshot, pop that thing, and it's out of play entirely. Again, though, that's only going to be for the heroic variant, and you can unlock that before you even start messing around with the heavy bolt pistol, so just something to throw out there. Next, coming into the melee options. Now, this is, again, one of the few spots where the tactical is going to be a little bit limited. Originally, all you had access to was going to be the chainsword. However, in a later patch, we did gain access to the combat knife. For me, personally, I strictly run the chainsword on this class. The chainsword, I feel it's probably the easiest melee weapon in the game to learn, and it's one of the most user-friendly. It's very good at dealing with hordes of enemies, and it's also good at single melee combat with Majors and extremist enemies. And it can also be quite effective as long as you learn the attack patterns as well to Terminus level enemies. Now, as always, with every melee weapon in the game, you're going to have 3 different defense styles. That's going to be balance, block, and fencing. The best way to think about it is balance is going to be a mix between block and fencing, where you still have access to gun strikes. However, your perfect parry window is going to be a lot smaller than what it would be, so it's going to require more precise timing than something in the fencing style. However, that being said, a lot of times you're going to have some better stats with the balance. Now, looking at block style, you're going to really see a lot of stronger base damage. They're typically going to be a little bit slower than balanced and balanced and fencing style. And for the most part, your cleaving potential should be a lot higher. However, again, that will change based on the individual weapon. For me, I tend to stick a lot to fencing just because I like a lot of the one-on-one dueling, and especially if I find that a group of Majors or higher have started to kind of crowd around me. If they do start throwing out attacks, that way I'm kind of able to still make a stand there, block those attacks, and if I need to reposition, it's not going to come at the cost of me taking a lot of health damage. However, that being said, don't rule out using weapons like block. For me personally, if I'm not using fencing, block's going to be the next thing, because even though you lose out on the ability for gun strikes, you will essentially get a melee buff that will occur where anytime that you prefer a block with the weapon, you'll see it'll start to glow, and once it does start to glow, your next attack is going to do some pretty big AoE damage. The block stack can occur up to 3 times, which if you get all 3, your next melee attack is going to do some pretty monstrous damage. Again, this is also one that does have a heroic variant. I personally do really like the heroic variant on this particular weapon. My only gripe about it is it does swing a little bit slower, but for the strength and cleaving potential that you have with it, it's definitely something to consider. And I think out of all the heroic weapons, or the weapons that we've talked about so far that have a heroic variant, this one is probably, as of right now, the one that I would recommend the most, but there are going to be better ones as we continue our discussion. Of course, the chainsword is going to be available on all but 2 classes, so if you do find yourself ranking it up early, it's never going to be bad to switch over to the combat knife. This one does also have a heroic variant as well. However, I recommend just doing the chainsword because I feel it's a better overall weapon. However, again, if you maybe started off with a different class or you already have it maxed out, definitely come back to the combat knife, because once we get over to the sniper, as you'll see, this is going to be the only weapon that's available for that particular class in terms of melee options. So definitely a decent one to look into. And the combat knife itself isn't terrible. I just feel that the chainsword is so much better. Now, moving into the assault class here, this is going to be our first real melee heavy class that we're going to talk about, the other one being the bulwark. So you're not going to have the option for a primary weapon. You're only going to have options, or you're only going to have access to secondary weapons. The assault has access to every secondary in the game. So again, like we already talked about for the bolt pistol versus the heavy bolt pistol, these are really fantastic options. Same with the plasma pistol as well. I would definitely recommend starting off with one of these 2 for the class, but if you already finished them up with another one, then it might be worthwhile taking a look into some of the other ones. I would say if you already have the 3 that we originally covered, the next secondary weapon I would recommend working on would be the Neo Volkite. The main reason is, so the other option that you have is the Inferno pistol. Now this is going to be on 2 additional classes. However, it is a melt-a-weapon, so it's essentially like a pocket shotgun, and you're working with a class that is more geared towards melee, so you want to have a stronger secondary weapon in terms of being able to reach out and touch targets that maybe you cannot hit with melee attacks. The Volkite pistol, it's not bad. I think a lot of people were initially expecting it to be a lot better than what it was. But it still gets the job done. It focuses somewhat similar to the Pyroblaster in that it's a damage over time. However, the difference being is with the Neo Volkite, once you hit a target for so long, you'll see them begin to heat up, and then there will be a small explosion. A lot of times for Minoris enemies, that's going to be enough to knock them out. However, your Majoris and above, you're going to have to do that multiple times. But the nice thing is, regardless of which variant you go with, the accuracy on them is phenomenal. It's essentially just like a red constant laser beam that's coming out of the barrel. So it's extremely accurate. And if you are hitting a target long enough, it is going to deal damage. You can definitely take out like Noranthropes or the Zanger Elite, which are more aerial targets. You are going to be able to take them out. Just be aware, though, it's probably not going to be as fast as some of the other options. And really, as you're ranking this weapon up, you're going to have 2 options. One's going to be kind of a little bit more geared towards damage. The other one towards ammo and magazine capacity. I'm just going to be 100% honest. I really do not use the Neo Volkite pistol. When it first came out, because it was a new weapon, of course, I grinded it out pretty quickly, but I just find I get so much more use out of the other sidearms that I haven't touched the Neo Volkite in quite some time. Now, moving on to the melee options, which is going to be tied with the Bulwark. You're going to have access to every melee weapon in the game, minus the combat knife. So, what I would recommend is, because you're going to have access to the chainsword already on 4 classes, and then with the combat axe, you're going to have access to that on 3 classes, I would focus on the 3 melee weapons that are going to be locked to assault and bulwark. That way, you're going to be able to kind of complete the remainder of the melee weapons. I prefer to start off and focus with the assault on the Thunderhammer. Thunderhammer is, honestly, I would say it's second place for my favorite melee weapon. The first is going to be the Power Sword, which we'll talk about later. But again, this is going to have all 3 styles of defense going on. And the nice thing about it is it's very simple to pick up and play around with. However, it does do a really good job of teaching you about charged attacks, and it's a little bit more forgiving than something like, let's say, the Power Fist. So I would definitely recommend starting off with this. That way you can learn about how the different charged attacks work and really start to focus on the timing. But that way, if it's something that you do struggle with, you have something that's going to be a little bit more forgiving than like the Power Fist, because you're still going to be able to engage targets rather quickly with just the standard melee options, but it does have some really good charged attacks that you're going to be able to utilize. Again, this is one that does have a heroic variant, and this is one that I would strongly recommend because, so for starters, it is the fencing defensive style, which I already said I personally prefer. And when you compare it to the other fencing option, it's just a straight up buff. On top of that, the bonus effect that you get with it, which is going to be leaving a shock grenade effect behind, that is massive, and it can really help out in clearing Minoris enemies, especially if your initial ground pound or charged attack did not take out as many as maybe what you thought it would. You're at least going to leave behind that shock grenade effect area, which is going to just drop them as soon as they enter the field. Plus, you do get some small damage over time for bigger targets as well, which is nothing to write off. But this is the one that I would recommend starting off with. I would then take a look at the Power Fist once you master the Thunder Hammer. And then I would kind of do this backwards with the Bulwark, which we'll talk about later, which would be starting with the Power Sword. But I would say once you get a feel for the Thunder Hammer and you kind of learn the basics of charged attacks, then I would take a look at the Power Fist, because the Power Fist really benefits a lot from power attacks. That's the main way you're going to be using this, is just doing a couple combos to open up some space to charge up and then dish out some monstrous damage. Again, it's not going to be as nearly forgiving because, as you can see, a lot of times the Power Fist, even though it says it's going to be fast, it's not going to be quite as fast as the Thunder Hammer, and you are relying a lot on charging up, so it's going to feel a little bit slower. But again, that's why we master that first with something a little bit easier, then move over to something that's a little more advanced. This one does also have a heroic variant as well. For me personally, though, it's one that I'm messing around with. I kind of like it because it plays a little different from the standard Power Fist, where I find myself using it more for light attacks, with, of course, still mixing in some heavy charged attacks here and there. But maybe if you want to transition over a little bit smoother, it might be worthwhile investing first in the heroic option and then kind of going back to some of the base versions. Now, this is one where I do recommend going for the block variant because you do get already some really high damage with it. It's going to be the highest damage variant. And when you do unleash a lot of those block buffed attacks, especially with the Assault's ground pound ability, you're going to do monstrous damage regardless of what difficulty you're playing on. So that's what I would say for the Power Fist. And then, of course, if you already have maybe those two finished, maybe you did them on the Bulwark, Power Sword and Power Axe, they are both worthwhile using, but we're going to save talking about them for a little bit. We're going to move right along next to the Vanguard, which the Vanguard does have access to a decent amount of weapons. So right off the bat, I'm going to say that there's no bad options for particularly the Vanguard class. I would say the nice thing about it is it has everything that you want and nothing that you don't. But in terms of weapons to start to focus on right off the bat, of course, the Melta rifle. This is the only other class along with tactical that has access to it. So if you didn't do it on the tactical, maybe you went with the Pyroblaster, now would be a really good time to work on the Melta rifle, especially because it pairs very well with the combat style of Vanguard, where you are going to be getting up close and personal quite a bit using your grapple launcher. But if you've already touched that, the next weapon I'm going to recommend that you work on for the Vanguard is going to be the Instigator Bolt Carbine. Again, this is one that does have a heroic variant. However, I'm not super big on this one just yet. I'm still playing around with it myself. I know the first couple times I used it, I wasn't blown away and preferred the standard relic tier, but I'm giving it another shot. But as always, if you unlock the heroic, you can unlock everything below that just by using the relic tier version of it. So if, let's say, maybe you're playing on just regular or substantial, you're going to be going in with an already maxed out weapon without having to do all the grinding for it. Well, you'll still have to grind. You'll just have to grind accolades instead. But regardless, though, the Instigator Bolt Carbine, it's a phenomenal weapon. The best way that I can kind of explain it is going to be if you are a Call of Duty fan. This is like the Warhammer equivalent of that COD 4 M16. It fires in a 3-round burst and is phenomenal for headshots because it definitely dishes out the damage. Now, as we kind of move along through the different variants that you're going to see, as you can see, you're going to have some that are going to start off with your standard base capacity, ammo, and reserves. However, you will see buffs towards your accuracy as well as your headshot multiplier, which is very nice, and that's how I personally prefer to utilize the bolt carbine is because it really does benefit from those headshot multipliers. But if you find that, hey, I'm burning through ammo quite a bit, you do have an option for increased mag capacity and ammo reserve, and you will be seeing at least some marginal updates to accuracy even as you rank it up. Now, once you hit Artificier, you will have an option that's going to just go straight in for a little bit higher damage without really giving you benefits to a lot of the other areas. But definitely would recommend utilizing this. This weapon is shared. I believe right now it's only the sniper and the Vanguard. So again, if this is one where maybe you're starting off with the sniper first, you could use this on there. It's still a very viable weapon. The next one that I would recommend doing is going to be the bolt carbine, which originally, this is actually my second time filming this. Originally, I said to avoid this, but kind of thinking back on it, I've changed my mind. The main reason is because just like the bolt rifle and the heavy bolt rifle, you have two different variants of this. So as soon as you hit Mastercrafted, you're going to get the traditional SMG version, but you're also going to get a marksman variant. So the SMG version, it's going to function just how you would expect, like an SMG in every other single video game out there. Now, something to keep in mind, if you are running the SMG style, as you can see, regardless of what tier it is, you do not have a headshot multiplier. However, when you switch over to the marksman variant, it's going to turn into a semi-automatic rifle. You're going to have lower magazine capacity, but you are going to receive a 2 times headshot multiplier, which is something that, regardless, the SMG variant is not going to have. Personally, what I like the bolt carbine for is I like it on classes that maybe struggle a little bit with hordes. So Vanguard, I feel you have a lot of different options. You can kind of build it out to whatever you want. So if you find yourself building a class with it that's more focused on dealing with single targets and you're struggling with whenever Minors are swarming you, this might be a nice little option to keep in the pocket to deal with them. Same can be said, except on a little bit of a smaller scale for the marksman variant, but it is worthwhile checking out because even if you don't like one variant, you might still like the other one, and having more options is always going to be better. Finally, there's the Oculus bolt carbine. This is, I would say, my go-to with the Vanguard. I do think it's a little kind of weird in some aspects. I think this is one that really benefits from ranking it up, getting it up to the relic tier. Essentially, it's very similar to the Instigator bolt carbine in that it is a more mid-ranged focused weapon that does have some actual zoom capabilities to it. However, the big difference is it's going to have a little bit less damage, but in return, it's going to be full auto. For me, this is something where I just find that once I get locked onto an enemy's head, as long as I'm using the appropriate variant, because as you can see, the accuracy on some of them isn't exactly the highest, and that is something I do want to throw out. Even if you are scoped in and it feels like, hey, I have my crosshairs right where it should be, you're still going to be able to clearly see through the scope that your shots are going to be going all over the place. For the other variants, I don't know what it is, but when you're using the standard Gathelmore Crusade Alpha, those shots are going to be a lot tighter. But this is something that just allows me to drill headshots consistently. But again, I don't think it's going to be as easy as something like the bolt carbine or the Instigator bolt carbine to use. Again, here's going to be my perk tree for that. And now moving in to the secondary options. So you're going to have access to the bolt pistol, heavy bolt pistol, inferno pistol, and neo volkite. Unless you haven't touched the bolt pistols yet, I'm going to recommend taking advantage of the fact that the Vanguard has a lot of different options in terms of its different range capabilities, to say now would be a good time to utilize either the Inferno pistol or the Neo Volkite just to get them ranked up. Specifically, I would say focus more so on the Inferno pistol because it is going to end up helping out the sniper class, which we'll be talking about here real soon. Again, this here is a pocket shotgun. It does exactly what you would think it does. Essentially, as you start to rank it up, you're either going to get a buff to your fire rate and range, or you're going to have higher ammo reserves and mag capacity for it. Personally, I do choose to go with the range and fire rate variants of this weapon. The main reason being is that within your perk tree, you can kind of deal with some of the downsides of the small mag capacity. But the main reason is the range on this is ridiculously short. So even if you do have that extra mag capacity, a lot of times you're just going to burn through those shots trying to do the same thing that, should you invest in the range, you're going to be able to do in one shot. But again, this is going to be a nice little get out of jail free card if you're struggling with getting surrounded by hordes of enemies. Just let off a couple rounds, and that should clear you a little bit of a space to buy you some breathing room. Now, looking into the melee options here, again, you have access to the chainsword. You also have access to the combat knife, and this class also has access to the power axe. Now, I would say if you've already knocked out the chainsword, now's a good time to start playing around with the combat knife and the power axe. I personally prefer the power axe over the combat knife. However, here's the thing. If you haven't touched the sniper class yet, I'm going to recommend that you go the path of the combat knife. However, if you've already gone through and played sniper, then probably take a look at the power axe. So the power axe does play, at least in my opinion, pretty similar to the combat knife, except it has a little bit better horde clearing capabilities, as you can see with some of the cleaving potential here. But both of them are more favorable towards single target dueling. Now, the big difference is I think that the power axe does have a little bit of a learning curve to it, that being that whenever you perform a perfectly timed parry or a block, you'll go into what's known as a power stance, which typically when people hit that point, they're going to want to immediately go into the gun strike. However, if you just hold your melee button again, like you're trying to do a charged or heavy attack, you're going to send out a little blade of energy that will do some additional damage, and a lot of times it's definitely worth doing that. But again, if you're just starting out, I don't blame you. You're going to see that gun strike indicator. You're going to want to go ahead and go right into that. However, if you've already kind of messed around with melee combat a little bit, you're starting to get the hang of it, and you've already done the sniper, it might be worth swinging back over and taking a look at the power axe itself. I still do run the chainsword on this class a lot, but as you can see, and this class here, I'm just kind of testing out more of the heroic weapons. But if I wasn't doing that, I would be using the power axe again on this specific loadout. But I'm either using the chainsword or the power axe for the Vanguard. Now, moving on to my personal favorite, the Bulwark here. Again, same thing with Assault, except you do not have access to the Inferno pistol. You're going to have both bolt pistols, plasma pistol, and the Neo Volkite. Focus definitely first either on the first three. If you've already knocked out the heavy bolt and plasma, come back, knock out the standard bolt pistol. But if you already have all three of them done just through all the other classes, go ahead and use the Neo Volkite. We're not going to spend too much time on it. Now, again, looking at the Bulwark, we're going to kind of work in a little bit of the reverse order as what I recommended for Assault. I'm going to say, for purely thematic purposes, you have to give the Power Sword at least a try. It's my favorite melee weapon in the game, and it's what I would recommend starting out with. Again, you're going to have access to all three different melee styles right off the bat here. Now, what I think makes the Power Sword my personal favorite is you actually have two different ways that you can use it. You have a speed and a heavy style, or it might just be light and heavy, regardless, 2 styles. That's all you have to keep in mind. The way that you're going to switch between the two is simply by holding down whatever your melee button is, and you'll see your character either put on a field of electricity on it or take that field off of it. If the field is on it, where you can noticeably see, hey, my weapon is glowing blue, you're in the heavy stance. If you get rid of that, you've switched back over to the light and speed style. And that's really how the power sword plays. You do have access to some charged attacks like the power rake, which can actually hit enemies that are in the air, like Nornthropes and the Zanger Elite. On top of that, you also have the power whirl, which is a nice way of dealing with hordes of enemies. That is one, though, where hopefully by the time you started playing Bulwark, you've kind of mastered some of the melee, because that's going to be a very big visual cue of where after you conduct a melee attack, you wait a few moments, you'll see your character kind of go into this ready stance, and then afterwards you just hit the melee button again. They'll go into the power whirl, and that's going to deal a lot of AoE damage. But I like using the light style for regular one-on-one combat, and then I switch over to heavy if I find I'm going up against groups of enemies. Now, this is one that does also come with a heroic variant. I would say it's worth picking up. This one caters a lot towards the power rakes, which, again, maybe if you're struggling with aerial targets while playing the Bulwark, this might be something to invest in early, especially if you're trying to rank up the power sword in specific. But other than the power sword, again, I would recommend then going into the power fist and then finally closing it out with the thunder hammer. Even though I do prefer the thunder hammer over the power fist, just the thing to keep in mind on the Bulwark is this is the only weapon, at least as of right now, that if you switch over to it, you are going to lose access to your storm shield. So as you can see, just by throwing that on my class, that shield disappears. But should I switch over to anything else, the storm shield will reappear. So that's just something to keep in mind, because I feel like that is one of the benefits to the Bulwark, is having that storm shield and being able to block incoming damage. But again, I would use the Bulwark as an opportunity to knock out the other 3 that are specific to it and assault. Now, coming over into the sniper category, this one here, it's going to be pretty straightforward. So right off the bat, let's talk about the 2 different sniper rifles that are available in the game. That's going to be the Bolt Sniper Rifle and the Las Fusil. Truthfully, just do the Bolt Sniper. I don't have anything really negative to say about the Las Fusil. I think it is a very viable option. However, in terms of how most snipers in video games work, you are going to get so much more out of the Bolt Sniper than what you're going to get out of the Las Fusil. And I would say once you get comfortable with sniping in here, then maybe look at the Las. Big reason is the Las has a charge up time, which it's not super long, but as I'm sure in any game that you've played where a weapon has a charge up time, that opens up chances for the AI to do something to where you just spent all that time really trying to focus in on that shot. Enemy moves away at the very last second. You're going to have a smaller room for error with the Bolt Sniper. Plus, again, you do have access to a heroic variant. However, I do not recommend touching this heroic variant until you get comfortable with it, because it's a very high risk, high reward weapon that is going to cater more towards people that, I guess for lack of a better term, are much more accurate, have a lot of time in the game, super familiar with the controls, stuff like that. So this is definitely geared towards players that are already above beginner and have considerable skill. They're going to get a lot of use out of it. However, that being said, the standard options that you have for the Bolt Sniper Rifle within the heroic or the relic tier category are all going to be phenomenal. Anyways, same thing with looking at the Artificier and Mastercrafted. Essentially, as you kind of go through, you're going to see either increased damage increased mag and ammo capacity or rate of fire increases. I find that I tend to stick more towards ammo capacity with it, just because unless you're using the heroic variant, especially once you're playing on, or if you're using a sniper that's kind of geared out towards the specific difficulty you're playing on, you're not going to be getting one-shot headshots anyways unless it's on Minoris enemies. However, that being said, you're still going to be able to two-tap them. Just knowing that, I like to have the extra mag capacity. But once you get the heroic sniper rifle and you've put some serious time into using it, that's definitely going to be worth using. But I would say start off with the bolt sniper. If you finish that and you're like, hey, I want to finish getting this class up to 25 and continuing to snipe, maybe then check out the las fusil. Now, in terms of bonus weapon or other primary options, the next one I'm actually going to recommend is one that we haven't seen again since the tactical. That's going to be the stalker bolt rifle. Main reason I'm going to recommend this is, let's go into the perk tree right over here, iron grip. This is a weapon buff that will affect not just the bolt sniper rifle, but also the stalker bolt rifle as well. It just makes sense that if you're already using the sniper class, you're going to want to maximize the amount of weapons that you can buff, especially through that perk. This is essentially a DMR. It's not going to hit quite as strong as a sniper, but as you can see, even from some of these lower levels, it's got some pretty wild damage. Again, this one's going to focus either on your headshot multipliers or your ammo capacity. However, once you get up towards relic, you're going to have a third option, which is the one that I actually find myself preferring, which is just going to give you an increase to the rate of fire. If you're already really good at pulling off headshots, you don't have to wait for that delay. You can just continue to drill them in the head. I find I get a lot of use out of it, but again, that's once you get to the relic tier category. But those are going to be the first two I would recommend starting off with. Again, we also have access to the Instigator bolt carbine, a very good option. I would say if you don't like sniping, but you still want to rank up the sniper class, I would take a look at the Instigator bolt carbine then. The main reason being is, again, it's going to pair extremely well with another perk in that same column, Dexterous Hands, which will affect the Instigator bolt carbine and then the standard bolt carbine as well. And this is the one class that I would really recommend, that if you are struggling with sniping, or you just find that due to naturally how the sniper's set up, it's not the greatest with horde clearing, this is a totally fair time to use the bolt carbine, especially its SMG variant. And there are plenty of builds that you can do that use the bolt carbine as a primary. But now let's take a look at the secondary options here. Very limited. You have both versions of the bolt pistol, standard and the heavy. And this is really going to be the time where I'm going to say, especially if you're using like the bolt sniper rifle, don't hesitate to start ranking up the Inferno pistol, just because with, like, let's say the bolt sniper or even the other bolt rifle there, those are going to be geared primarily towards bigger, more important targets. This is going to give you a way to deal with a lot of the horde style enemies that you're going to see within the game. So that's what I'd recommend using. The other thing that I would say is, this is going to be the one time I'm going to flip the script on recommending the heavy bolt over the standard bolt pistol. The main reason is, if you are pulling off headshots, you are going to get a little bit more, specifically on the sniper class, with the standard bolt pistol. And that's just because you have already naturally higher ammo capacity within the mag and within your reserves. I do like it just for kind of popping the Minoris, quickly transition from headshot to headshot with it. I do run the heroic version myself, just because I think it's kind of cool to have that little pocket M16 going. Doesn't really do anything too wild, but I just like it for its horde clearing capabilities, which in fairness the sniper does kind of struggle with. But what I do want to throw out on the topic of horde clearing with the sniper, and this is going to be specific to Tyranids. Focus on the Majoris level enemies and up, because if you kill a Majoris or higher that's above Minoris, they will die alongside it. That is not true, however, though, for Chaos, but at least you can do that with the Tyranids. In terms of melee, you really don't have a choice. You're going to use the combat knife. That's your only option, so you might as well just use it and get used to it. It does fine. Again, it's more meant for one-on-one dueling. However, you can use it to some effect at dealing with hordes. I think it's really a good weapon to remind you that you can parry even Minoris enemies. So yes, you'll probably still take a fair bit of damage if you have a horde that's upon you, but as long as you're remembering to parry every so often some of the Minoris enemies, you're still going to keep your armor bar there, and you can clear out a good bit of a horde without having to take any damage to your health. For this, I do recommend just taking the fencing style, because personally it's just going to be my personal favorite. It is more geared towards one-on-one dueling, so even with some of the higher damage and cleaving potential that you see in the other two, it just doesn't feel that you're really going to notice those buffs whatsoever. And then finally, we come on to the big boy himself here. Whoops, that's not what we're looking for. But so you do have 5 different options for the heavy in terms of primary weapons, and as you can see, we don't have to worry about anything for melee there. Here's going to be the thing flat out up front. So you do have access to the heavy bolt rifle. I know I sung its praises. I love this particular weapon. Do not touch it for the heavy. Do it all on tactical. There's no reason to use this on the heavy whatsoever. You just get so much more out of all the other weapon choices. Again, this is a good weapon. I guess if you almost finished getting it up to its next rank and you're like, hey, I just have this little autistic tick where I have to finish it before I'm going to touch something else. Cool. You can finish it up on here, but then immediately just promise me you'll switch over to something else. But for starters, I am going to really recommend the heavy bolter. It's good. It's essentially a chain gun. It's going to allow you to get a lot of damage out there. You have, I don't want to say an unlimited magazine size, but your magazine size is capped to the ammo that you have remaining. So a lot of the heavies weapons, they are going to deal more with overheating versus actually having to reload. The only exception to that is the heavy bolt rifle. But as you can see, once you start getting into the master crafted, this is where you're going to see the branch really devolve. You're going to either focus towards venting speed, accuracy, or ammo capacity, and that's going to get more pronounced as you go through. There is going to be a 4th option once you're at relic that's just going to give you a small little damage buff. For me personally, I recommend going with the options that increase your accuracy. The main reason is it does do a decent bit of damage, and it has a really good fire rate, and you've got a lot of ammo that you can use. However, none of that matters if you're not hitting shit with it. So I like to go with the accuracy version, because the other variants of them, it's very quick for you to see that bloom effect occur, and you're going to start having shots go wide very, very frequently and very early on. So I'd focus on an accuracy version of this. In terms of ease of use, I think the next one's going to be the multi-melta here. It's a melta rifle, but bigger and better. You don't have to worry about reloading, anything like that. We're not going to spend too much time on this. Personally, I would say once you start getting into the mastercraft and you have some options opening up, as you can see, it's really going to affect rate of fire, range, and then of course ammo capacity. I go with the ammo capacity on here because it's already so powerful that even if you're not getting the maximum damage or the enemy's not within that maximum damage range, you're just still going to lumber towards them and destroy them regardless. So I just go with the increased ammo capacity myself. And then finally, well, not finally in terms of weapons, but the last one I'm going to say to start off with is going to be the heavy plasma incinerator. Now, what I will throw out is there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve to this, in that it does not shoot a standard projectile. Of course, it is going to shoot a ball of plasma. However, it doesn't shoot it like the standard bolt pistol or the plasma. I'm sorry, not bolt pistol. Plasma pistol. There we go. Let's get the brain working again. Or the plasma rifle. It's going to actually lob the projectile. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that even if your crosshairs show that you should be hitting something, it's going to have a little bit of an arc going on to it. Just keep that in mind. Plus, this one does have the option for you to charge it, which is really where you're going to see this weapon perform its best, is especially as you rank it up higher and higher, you're going to be able to send out just a couple charge shots and clear the field of Majoris enemies and even higher. Now, that being said, though, if the heavy's the last class that you're touching, you got 300 accolade points, I totally recommend going with the heroic variant of this because it's so good. Main reason being is, so for starters, it fires a lot faster, as you can see. Plus, you already get a decent buff. Well, yeah, decent buff to firepower as well. It stays on par with the other three. However, the big thing is going to be is you don't have to worry about doing charge shots. Let's take a look at it here, just that way you can read what the actual perk says. But you get an increase to your rate of fire instead of charge shots. This already does quite a bit of damage with the base shots, but once you get this variant of it, you're going to be able to send those shots out a lot faster, and it becomes a lot more effective than just the standard charge shot because you don't have to worry about charging it. Plus, the other benefit is that lob and arc is not as pronounced as nearly on any of the other plasma incinerators, so this one's definitely worth using. But this is a very nice way to kind of clear the area of key targets. Now, I do also know that the pyro cannon is on here, and I sung the praises of the pyro blaster. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's just like a placebo effect or something, but I really do not care for the pyro cannon on the heavy class. I just don't feel that it works nearly as well in close quarters as the heavy melta does, or the multi melta does. So I prefer to just kind of avoid this altogether. If I do want to enjoy the miracle of lighting things on fire, I do that on the tactical. It's still worth ranking up. It follows the same exact kind of pattern as its little brother on the tactical, where either an increase to ammo or venting speed. I do choose to go the venting speed route, but to me it really feels like this is a weapon where you have to go into the heavy stance to get actual use out of it, whereas with the pyro blaster you don't even have to worry about that concept. So if you already have everything else maxed out, or you're just really dead set on I need to burn everything in front of me, then maybe touch this. If not, and you're looking for something that thrives up close, just go with the multi melta. And then let's see here, and I know I do have it listed there, but let me show you why. The main reason that I keep it on there is because of using thermal boost, which will help with its damage output. So, and it also does kind of fit with the Black Templars theme. And finally, in terms of secondary weapons, you have access to the three staples: the bolt, heavy bolt, and plasma. I would say if you've already ranked all three of these up, you can go ahead and rock the Inferno pistol. Actually, I'll be 100% honest, I forgot the Inferno pistol was even on this class. But it's an option that's there. Again, I think your strongest competitors are still going to be the plasma pistol and the heavy bolt pistol, especially because the plasma pistol already pairs along with that one perk that I had thrown out before. But those are your options, and that's our final class, at least for now. Within a couple of weeks, we are going to be getting the Tech Marine, and from there we will have at least one more weapon to go over, but we will save that for whenever that class comes out, and we'll just do something specific towards that particular class. But there you go. If you're just starting out, that's all the different weapons that I would say, hey, go ahead, focus on them first of all. That way you can get into the game. You're going to have hopefully a more enjoyable experience, and it's going to allow you to play with some of your friends, hopefully on some of the higher difficulties, and just make the whole idea of grinding this game out a little less daunting than what it is. But as always, thank you for watching. Feel free to throw your own personal comments and thoughts down in the comment section, and we'll catch you next time. And now we're actually going to play the game.